My name is John Bernstein. I am a lobbyist from Washington, D.C. Don't all applaud at once. But I'm actually really your lobbyist in many respects because I'm there. I represent COSIN and ISTE, probably organizations you guys are either members of or familiar with. My job is to get more education technology dollars, protect the E-rate, all the stuff you're about to see. I am also the only thing that's standing between you and cocktail hour. And I apologize for that, but the good news is that, at least for me, I'm not following the guy who just played dueling banjos on a single guitar. You talk about things that we should really aim for and try to do, just impossible things. Yeah, that would be one of them, and clearly I'm never going to do that. But I have a few other impossible things that I'm striving for here, which we'll talk about. But first, what I want to do is I want to ask a question. How many people here watched the debate last night? Look at that. Look at this. Some informed citizens. It was, yeah, I noticed it was a cocktail hour here, but they kept rerunning it out west. So then they put it back on again at 9 o'clock or something like that? It's still cocktail hour. Good. Well, actually, some of it might have gone down better with drinks. I was stone cold sober when I watched it. So, show of hands. How many people think President Obama won? Those who watched. How many people think Mitt Romney won? How many people thought it was a draw? Okay. How many people heard a lot of specifics about education? Exactly. I heard nothing about education last night. In fact, I've heard very little about education at all. All I heard, in fact, was some lines about Pell Grants because, well, again, they were at a college. So, that was definitely a big suck up to the audience for everybody. So what I want to do today is sort of capitalize on clearly this semi-interest, at least, in the presidential race here, and talk about what's going on in Washington, what's not going on in Washington, and what might be going on in Washington. My agenda is pretty simple. I want to talk a little bit about California, about who's important here, who comes from California and comes to Washington. I want to talk about the money. I want to talk about ESCA. That ought to take about 2 seconds. I want to talk about the Enhancing Education Through Technology program and its successor. That's not going to take long either because those two things are probably not going to happen during the lame duck. And then I'm going to talk about E-rate and conclude with some things that you folks can do. So let's start with California. Look at that picture. They look like they like each other, huh? Boxer and Feinstein. I actually got my start with Dianne Feinstein as a fellow in her office in 1994, and I have to say, she was really good to me. When the Democrats lost the House and the Senate, and everyone was out on the bricks trying to find a job, she actually picked up the phone and made calls for me, and I'd only been a fellow in her office for about 5 or 6 months. So I really respected her. The important thing about these two senators is they actually have a fair amount of power over things you care about. Dianne Feinstein is a senior member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. That means money. That means education spending, among other things. So she really matters. Barbara Boxer sits on the Senate Commerce Committee. That means that she has oversight over the FCC and the E-rate program. So these are two people who have a lot to do with policies that really impact education technology. And I would definitely encourage you to spend some time getting to know their staffs. Getting to know them might be a little hard. As I recall, I think Feinstein lives in some sort of gated house community out in the Presidio, so it's probably hard to get in there. A couple other folks. How many people can identify these two people? I bet you can identify one. I don't know if I'm going to count you, but all right. Can you identify both of them? Let's see. Yes, very good. Oh, okay. So and what does Kevin McCarthy do, Tim?
Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's the whip, right?
Yeah. So he's essentially the #3 Republican in the House. You know what his job is? It's wrangling the 89 freshmen. That's got to be fun. There was a whole New York Times piece on Kevin McCarthy about how he was like their camp counselor, and they would all like come and shoot hoops in his office, and ordering pizzas, and he just has to keep them on board, not going off the deep end, and that's no mean feat. Nancy Pelosi, I think everybody knows, she is the current House Minority Leader, and just like 2 years ago, There are rumors that Nancy Pelosi is going to be leaving. She's going to retire after, well, there's somebody who's going to miss Nancy. Anybody like Nancy? All right. Well, I mean, Nancy, look, she's definitely was a historical figure. She's also a very divisive figure. She probably holds a fair amount of power still within the Democratic caucus, but there's a good chance she'll leave because she probably does not have enough votes anymore to really remain in that post, and there are other people who are eager to get it. So as whatever you think about Nancy Pelosi, which is not much, she was from California and can do a few things. Appropriations, Jerry Lewis, there's a big red on him. That's because he's retiring, so he's no longer going to be important. But a couple other people who are important. Lucille Roybal Allard from Los Angeles. I don't know if is anyone here from Los Angeles? No? Oh, yes. So Lucille actually is the person who sponsored and helped write the Attain program, which is supposed to be the successor for E2T2, and is an office that I work really closely with. Barbara Lee, who's right below her, is also on appropriations and also on the right subcommittee, the Labor, HHS, and Education subcommittee, where they decide education funding. Problem is, they're all Ds. And the Rs rule that committee, run that subcommittee entirely with an iron fist, so they don't really have a lot of input. They can and do ask for particular funds to be appropriated to programs they really care about. But there's very few Democrats and a lot of programs and not enough money to go around, so there's limited things they can do. I know Roybal Allard puts us up high on our list, but as you've seen, E2T2 doesn't exist anymore. The people who matter in education policy, you've got two big ones here. One is Duncan Hunter from San Diego, Duncan Hunter Jr. His father held that seat and is retired, and apparently, just like the Middle Ages, it just passes to the son. I guess that's primogeniture or something. He is actually, believe it or not, someone who has almost zero education experience, and yet he runs the subcommittee on elementary and secondary education. Perfect. He's educatable, right? Because he doesn't really, he's a blank slate. In fact, he will tell you that every time he speaks, and I've seen him speak a number of times. I don't really know much. You people are the experts in the room. After a couple years, it kind of gets old when he says, I don't really know much. That's not really what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody who has ideas. But Hunter is young. He gets gadgets. He gets technology to some extent. And he actually showed up at the ISTE annual conference in San Diego last June and did a tour with us and gave a speech and took some pretty pointed questions. So I give him high marks for getting out there and trying. A lot of Republicans will not even show up. He shows up. You may not agree with 90% of what he says, if you're an educator, but he is listening, and he is willing to argue with you. So that's at least a starting point. George Miller is the ranking member for the Democrats on the Education and Workforce Committee. He's a guy who really loves technology, and he's a guy whose office I'm working really closely with to possibly craft some new technology legislation. I can't really get into the details of that now, but I think that most of you would like it. If and when it gets introduced. What we need to do is we need to make it bipartisan. And that is a hard thing to do in Washington right now, maybe after the election. Lastly, I'll note one other person, Henry Waxman. Anybody familiar with Henry Waxman? Yeah. So Waxman's been there forever, and that's good news because he has seniority on the House Commerce Committee, which controls the E-rate. And Waxman is a supporter of the E-rate program, and he's somebody who's a go-to for us when there are problems. These are all people who you should keep in mind. And there's plenty of other California members, but these are the members that I picked out as people you should be thinking about. These folks and Feinstein and Boxer. Let's talk about money. Can everyone see that picture? It was my first effort at clip art today. That's a giant can being kicked by well, actually a smaller foot than the can, oddly. Maybe I blew it up poorly. What this symbolizes, can you guess? Yes, it's kicking the can down the road. I was looking for the can going down a road with a foot, but I didn't really find that. But this really shows you what Washington is about right now. And it's not just about this on money. It's about this on everything. Washington has essentially punted once again on FY13 appropriations. I mean, believe it or not, folks, 16 days ago, 17 days ago, the federal fiscal year started. But the budgets aren't done. In fact, there are no appropriations bills that have passed, including education. What have they done instead? They've passed a temporary funding bill called a CR, a continuing resolution, which basically means that everything has been funded at last year's levels for the next 6 months until March. So they not only kicked the can down the road, they kicked it halfway down the road. I mean, half of the fiscal year is now taken up in this continuing resolution. So keep that in mind. Your funds will keep flowing for the next 6 months, the regular title funds you get, until March, at which point they'll have to cut some sort of deal on funding. It's been kicked essentially into the next administration. Education technology, though, wherever the can gets kicked, we're not even in the can. There is no funding for the Enhancing Education Through Technology program. There has not been funding for this program, unfortunately, since 2010. So in either bill that I've seen in the House and the Senate have both crafted their versions of education appropriations, there's no E2T2 funding. In fact, here's the chart. I don't know if folks can see the chart. I've tried to make it in as big a font as I could, but there's a couple things that are important here. And one is, you see those red zeros going across? Yeah, that's E2T2. There's no money there. Another thing that's important is the blue at the bottom, I3. You can see that the administration wants about $150 million for it, and the Senate has essentially given it to them. But there's a little asterisk, and that asterisk, if you can read very much to the bottom here, is ARPA Ed. The administration intends to take about 1/3 of the money out of I3 and give it to a new program called ARPA Ed. People familiar with DARPA here in the room? Well, now we got ARPA Ed. And what it's supposed to be is Advanced Research Projects Agency for Education. It's supposed to come up with a killer app. All this stuff that we been hearing, I think, and you guys have been hearing for the past couple of days, all these brilliant minds who've come out here to show you stuff, and all the brilliant minds in this room, talking about the killer app. The federal government's going to come up with it through ARPA Ed with about a $50 million stake. Thank God no companies are involved in this. So I think what's also interesting in that line item is there's a 0 next to the House. The House is not buying into I3. They don't like it. They don't like the fact that it's competitive. They don't like the fact that it disadvantages rurals because it's competitive. And they just really don't want to give the president his pet priority. So this I3 line at the bottom is an example of just how far apart the House and the Senate are. Senate says, sure, Mr. President, I'll give you $150 million. The House says, no, we're not giving it to you. In fact, what the House really wants to do is kind of interesting. What they're most interested in doing is sort of loading up on some of the major programs, particularly IDEA, and not really giving much money or flat funding everything else. The Senate has scattered their money to a lot of different programs and are not interested in putting their money in 1 or 2 pots. So they're going to have to come up with a compromise between these two positions between now and March. But while they're doing that, guess what's coming? Sequestration. Have people heard this word out here, sequestration? Sort of? Okay, well, sequestration is a fancy word in budgetary terms, which basically means across-the-board cuts. They're going to sequester your appropriations like a jury in a separate room, except they're never letting them out. They were essentially starving the jury to death. And what sequestration means is that because the federal government, because this group of negotiators from the House and the Senate were unable to come up with a deal to reduce the federal budget deficit by, I think, $1.4 trillion. They couldn't come up with the numbers. They couldn't make them work. This across-the-board cut kicked in, which affects defense, affects all domestic discretionary programs, including education, and which is automatic, meaning that they've essentially said, since we couldn't come to a decision, we have created this mechanism that's going to make the decision for us, and it's going to be a really harsh, and big budget axe. They are taking a chainsaw to the budget because they couldn't come up with and make decisions on what should be cut and where. So what that means is that for education, you're looking at 8.2% across the board cut. That is the latest estimate. There may be more estimates coming, but that's sort of the most consistent number I've seen, is anywhere between 8 and 10% of all education funds are going to be cut. And it's not like there's going to be exceptions. It's not like Title I and IDEA are going to be exempted. They're going to be cut like everybody else. In fact, studies I've seen show $1.2 billion in Title I money being essentially disappearing. Title II, the teacher quality piece, $207 million of the $2.5 billion will disappear. Those are real dollars, sir. What's going on between January and March is nothing, frankly. Supposedly negotiations, a swearing in of a new president, but they don't really get their act together and really don't come into session until February. I mean, they should be negotiating right now on some of this stuff. They should be negotiating. This is what I was getting to. It's a good question. They should be negotiating to figure out all the tax cuts, to figure out how to get rid of sequestration, and also to figure out what they're going to do on FY13 appropriations. And maybe that's going on at the very highest levels, but a lot of people are skeptical of that. So, in fact, they shouldn't be waiting until then. They should be doing it. Because January 2nd is when sequestration kicks in. And from what I can tell, it's going to happen. Some states have already decided to take 10% of their dollars and put them aside in a bank account, expecting they're going to be called back. I heard Texas did that. But one thing that's important for folks to know in this room, the dollars to schools from sequestration won't actually disappear until the next school year. They'll come out January 2nd, but they're coming out of FY13 appropriations, not FY12. So those dollars actually won't disappear until September or October. So for all the projects that you have planned for this year, sequestration should not impact them. If people tell you, well, sequestration's coming, we can't possibly spend any money this year, this is the year to spend some money. This is the year to use what you've got and not to reserve it. And I'm not just making that up. There's actually a letter that went out to all the state chief school officers from the Department of Education that says exactly that. So one of the things when Tim and I were talking on the phone about this presentation, I asked, well, should I really be talking about the presidential race and what will happen? He said yes. So here we go. If Romney wins, I mean, I think if Obama wins, I think we know what will happen, right? It will be, at least in education funding, it will be sort of the same priorities, probably I-3, race to the top district, promised neighborhoods, et cetera. So we sort of know that. We have a pretty good handle after 4 years of how the president wants to spend education dollars, what his priorities are. But Mitt Romney is more of a mystery in some respects. There are several briefing papers. There have been some debates between advisors that I've sat through or that I've seen notes from. And what I've been able to cobble together is that Mitt Romney actually has some fairly dramatic changes he'd like to make. And it's surprising that education hasn't come up at all in these debates, and it probably will not come up in the third debate, which is entirely on foreign policy. But the number one thing that Mitt Romney wants to do is essentially take the Title I and IDEA funds and essentially voucherize them and let them follow the student. This is a way to promote choice. And it's not clear to me, but I think it's probably likely that he would like the dollars to follow not just to public schools, not just to charter schools, but probably to private schools as well. Additionally, he wants to continue to push for charters and digital schools, meaning virtual schools, by requiring states to change their enrollment policies, remove the caps on charters. Does California have a cap on charters? Does anyone know? I actually don't know the answer to that. Okay. Well, there are states that do. For teacher quality programs, he wants to consolidate them and block grant them. It's not clear which teacher quality programs he's referring to, but I would assume that includes the current Title IIA and a bunch of others. Lastly, though, and this is what's really important, what seems to get lost, his first act, what he'd like to see done after you get done with cutting 8.2% of all education funds through sequestration, is another 5% across the board cut for non-security discretionary spending. That includes education. So another 5% cut on top of the 8.2% cut. Now, all of these things are not things that he can do himself. Congress has to go along with it. All of these things are things that you say in a campaign, that you put out in briefing papers, that you may not actually attempt to do once you get into office. Because when you become president, as you'll find, it's not so easy to just say, I'm going to create 12 million jobs in 4 years. Or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You've got to work with Congress. And what he's going to face is the same divided Congress that President Obama faces right now. And it's not easy to get anything done. ESCA reauthorization is something the president really wanted to get done. This is a picture of the president embracing Arnie Dungan. Those were happier days. Those were days when there was still a chance that ESEA would actually move somewhere. This picture, I think, was taken 2 years ago. It's not happening. And just like it didn't happen for President Obama, it's probably not going to happen for a potential President Romney either. If he really wants to do ESEA reauthorization, he's going to have to work with a Congress that probably will be still, the House will still be in Republican hands, but the margin by which the Republicans control the House is going to be smaller because there'll be some Democratic pickups probably. The Senate, even if the Republicans take back the Senate, it will be by the narrowest of margins. Maybe it'll be 51-49. And while that sounds great, and it sounds like, and we're all supposed to live in a democracy where the majority rules, that doesn't work that way in the Senate. It doesn't work that way. In the Senate, you need 60 votes to close debate and move on to a final vote. That's called cloture. It doesn't happen anymore. There are virtually no votes on anything because 60 votes, the supermajority, is required of virtually everything. So the chance of getting an ESEA reauthorization passed in a Romney administration are just as few, or just as small, I should say, as in the current Obama administration. And in fact, by the way, one thing I have heard, and this is an interesting point, is that, and we're going to get into this in a second, is that Romney apparently is no fan of the waiver process. And he would like to actually take away all of the waivers that have already been granted. Now, his advisors have said contradictory things on this, but at the most recent town hall debate that was held between some education advisors, the Romney person actually said that. So we'll see. I could talk about ESEA reauthorization and what's happened, but it's almost pointless at this point. The Senate has a bill. It's dramatically different than, it's a comprehensive bill. It's dramatically different than the House bill, which is 5 separate bills. The Senate moved theirs through committee. The House moved all 5 of theirs through committee. But they never went to the floor. And they're not going to go to the floor. And once the Senate passed their version in committee in October 2011, yes, we're celebrating the anniversary of ESEA actually having finally moved somewhere. As soon as that happened, and by the way, it received the support of 3 Republicans in committee, many of those Republicans said, yeah, we only really supported it to get it out of committee because we wanted to make changes to what we just approved. So I don't see this ESEA version in the Senate going anywhere, which is unfortunate because we actually had a big victory a year ago, which is we got the successor bill to the Enhancing Education Through Technology program attached on a voice vote. That was a big win for us. The House version, I will say this, it does not contain a separate program, but it actually has some language. There's a definition of technology within the Title I bill. This is a specific Title I bill that the House passed. And it has tech included within the professional development definition. That's stuff that I would like to see in the Senate bill too, but didn't make it in. So ESEA in the House, ESEA in the Senate, they're not happening, and I don't know if they're going to happen. E2T2, how many people are familiar with this program? How many people used to get money out of this program? I wish we could get you some more. We tried, and the only Department of Education direct investment in education technology has gone by the wayside. We even tried to create a separate program called Attain, where we sort of juiced up and focused E2T2 a little more. We put more money into professional development, saying 40% had to be reserved instead of 25%. We established a floor, a minimum floor for which districts could get money. Instead of getting $50, which some districts got as their formula distribution, they would have gotten $3,000. We made it more formula than competitive so that there'd be a lot more money to go around, and we tried to focus the competitive on change, on innovation. And even, finally, in twisting ourselves into one last piece of the pretzel here, we decided to make this a program that if we didn't get enough money, if we didn't get $300 million, rather than money just going out to the states, it became a national competitive grant program run by the Department of Education. We had to do that. But this program, this Attain version that we wrote 3 or 4 years ago, it hasn't moved anywhere beyond what the Senate did a year ago, and we're probably going to have to make some significant changes if we ever hope to see another direct education technology bill again. Sir. No. Those dollars have simply disappeared. There's no, I'm sorry? Those are other dollars. That's the enhancing education. CTE is a completely separate line item. And that line item, by the way, is still relatively well funded. I think there's about $1.1 billion in CTE. And from my understanding, is some of those dollars are used to buy technology. Have any folks here used CTE dollars to buy technology? That's one. I see a sort of half-hearted wave back there. Okay. It's a good source. Let's talk about waivers for one quick second. 33 states, plus D.C., which is sort of a state, just don't have any voting rights, have been granted waivers already. 11 more states have applied. California is one of those 11 states. But California, of course, has applied for a waiver that only really applies to California, meaning that everybody else has agreed that they're going to do teacher and principal evaluations. The state of California said, well, you know, we'd like all the flexibility, but really don't want to do evaluations in the way that you want us to do evaluation. So they've submitted their own different, distinct application in the way that California likes to do. I don't know whether it's going to get approved. It has not been turned down yet. I think it was submitted back in May, and it's still hanging out there. And Arnie Duncan, when asked questions about it, has refused to say anything. So it's possibly still in play. But I cannot believe that the Department of Ed could find some sort of logic to support giving California everything it wants after 33 states and D.C. have already agreed to what the department wanted. We'll see. We can go into the waivers thing if you'd like. But essentially what it would do, if California gets it, is give you immense flexibility over the use of federal dollars. And you would no longer have the AYP requirements, which have been probably the bane of just about everybody's existence who's an educator. You would have to give up stuff in order to do it, except, of course, California does not want to, which is teacher and principal evaluations are sort of mainly the issue there. Waivers are an interesting deal, but one thing about waivers, I don't know if folks know this, they're not forever. They're really only supposed to be 2.5 years. That's supposed to give Congress time to redo and reauthorize ESCA. But, like I just said, I don't think that's going to happen. So the chances are is these waivers are here for a much longer period of time, and they're a much bigger deal. One other thing that's also worth noting, California, as I mentioned, has produced its own sort of separate distinctive waiver. That may get rejected, but the department has also left the door open for groups of districts within states that don't have waivers to apply. And there's apparently 8 districts here, including LA, and I think Long Beach and a couple others, that have lined up and said, we're ready to go once you reject California. So what may happen is some counties in California are going to no longer have NCLB requirements, and others are. We'll see how that goes. E-rate. We talked about E-rate earlier. E-rate is a tremendous program. It's actually a program that I was fortunate enough to be there at the birth of, that I have watched through its growth and maturity. My second day on the job as a lobbyist, I sat in the Senate Commerce Committee and watched this program be added in the markup as an amendment. I had no idea what I was watching, nor did I have any idea that 17 years later I'd still be doing this program. But this program has done more than virtually any other program. It says $2.25 billion a year in discounts for telecom access, internet access, and internal connections. It's actually now about $2.3 billion a year. And California, look at this, California is responsible or has received about 15% of the money over the 13 years the E-rate has been around. $4.8 billion. That's a good chunk of change out of $33 billion. So California really makes out on E-rate. But the problem is that, like everything, there's not enough money to go around. This gentleman over there is Jay Rockefeller. He is the senator from West Virginia who was one of the godparents of the E-rate program. In fact, he's the last sitting senator now, after Olympia Snowe retires, who will have had anything to do with the E-rate program when we enter 2013. Jay Rockefeller's office understands this, but it's not clear whether they're going to move on it. And they understand that there's not enough money in E-rate. This year, there were almost $3 billion in applications for E-rate dollars, and there was only $2.3 billion to go around. Originally, what we thought was going to happen was that there was about $400 million in rollover funds, and they were going to prorate priority 2, the internal connections piece, after paying off all the priority 1, the telecom piece, and the internet access piece. But good news is that the FCC reached into the couch cushions and came up with another $600 million. Usually when I reach in the couch cushions, I can't come up with enough for the pizza. But they came up with $600 million, and as a result, we now have about 3.3 or $3.4 billion available E-rate dollars for this year. That will take care of all priority 1 requests, and will take care of 90% priority 2 discount requests. But that's it. And here's the thing. Number 1, where the demand is growing is in priority 1. And that is going up and up and up. Can people tell me why demand in priority 1 is going up? Anybody know why? Well, wireless. Who said wireless? That is absolutely correct. It is demand for wireless, people buying expensive wireless contracts because they can get them through priority 1, so you're also partially right, because they know they can stick it in there. So that number keeps going up. And pretty soon, probably next year, we're going to reach the point where there's simply one, huge demand in priority 1 that's going to overcome the amount of money available. 2, because there can't be any more money left under these cushions on the couch the FCC found. There can't be any more money left. We're going to have to start prorating priority 2 at 90%. Well, so the gentleman says raise the tax. Well, there's a couple things wrong with that statement. Number 1, not a tax. It's a fee. It matters. Because if it were a tax, it would have been deemed unconstitutional by the Fifth Circuit. But more importantly, raising the fee is hard. Because how does the money come? Where does the money come from? Does anyone know? On your phone bills. But not just on your phone bills. On your long distance and international phone bills. How many people have really big long distance bills anymore? No one. Not even me. We all use Skype, email, text. So essentially, the base of the E-rate program has been the least successful market for the telecom companies in the past 10 years. And that means that if you raise it on this, you are raising it on very low-income people who probably don't Skype, senior citizens, etc. Those are the people who are going to bear the brunt of their phone bills going up in these areas, unless we change the basis of the program. Unless we expand it out beyond long distance and international and start covering a whole bunch of other folks who don't pay in, who are essentially free riders. Now, wireless, by the way, has a safe harbor, and I'll get your question in a second. So they are actually protected. You want to know why wireless has a safe harbor? Because when the E-rate started, it was a fledgling industry. I was just at a conference that Qualcomm sponsored. You probably heard this stat, where they said there were 6.3 billion cell phone contracts in the world. More than one for every person. I don't think it's a fledgling industry anymore. I think they could probably afford to put a little more money in here, but don't quote me on that. So what has to happen is the base probably has to get expanded out. We need to put at least another $1 billion into the cap, but there's another issue here too, which is this, and this may, some of the people in the room here may not love this. Who gets the priority 2 money now? Who gets it year in and year out? Yeah, but who are those people? Large urban districts continue to suck up the balance of the priority 2 money. It is LA, it is New York, it is San Diego, it is Puerto Rico, it is Chicago, it is San Francisco to some extent. These people have gotten money every year they've wanted it, bearing in mind there's like a 2 and 5 years rule. And it's never, and now it's almost impossible for it to get beyond those groups. So there's a fairness issue here too, which is that they're very poor. They're the poorest of the poor by definition. But are they substantially poorer than, let's say, 87%? 86%? What about the rural areas that have never seen a dime? This is a senator from West Virginia. Do you think he cares that all the urban areas have been getting all the money? Yeah. There aren't many urban areas in West Virginia, and he started the program. So there is a fairness issue at work here about the same people getting the money year in and year out, and how do we spread those dollars further down? That's going to have to get addressed. The other issue is that a lot of the 90% people apply. Why? I mean, why do they apply? You want to know why they apply? Because the 10%, at the end of the day, is not so much to them. It's not enough skin in the game. Originally, when we talked about the E-rate program after it passed, and the FCC was deciding, you know, should there be skin in the game? I mean, the first question was, should E-rate be a free rate? There was actually some thought as to making this 100% free. Everyone said people will value it more. People will value the money they receive from the E-rate more if they put a little skin in the game. Well, apparently not enough, because they keep coming back and back and back at the 90% level, and they pay the 10%, and they're fine. So another thing that may have to happen is an adjustment to the discount matrix. Maybe 90% shouldn't be the top level. Maybe it should be 80. Maybe it should be 75. I don't know. But behavior has to change, and there has to be some structural changes to the program that go along with putting more money under the cap. Because even if I were successful, and this is, by the way, the #1 priority for ISTE and COSIN in this area, is to put at least $1 billion more under the cap. Even if you do that, that's still not enough to cover 5 billion, 5.3, 6 billion in demand, is it? It's not. But if we make some more changes to the program, which change behavior, plus raising the cap, I think we have a better chance of this program going, you know, living on for another 5 to 10 years. Gift rules. People familiar with this? Sadly, as am I. All I will tell you is this, is that the FCC, in their infinite wisdom, decided that the federal gift rules, which usually apply to congressmen, senators, their staffs, federal government officials, should apply to all of you too when it comes to the E-rate program. The problem is that they're kind of not, they don't really fit that well with your jobs in many cases. And a lot of you don't have ethics counsel at your disposal like folks in the House and the Senate do. And there's a lot of questions we've raised about membership in organizations where telecom companies contribute, or going to events that telecom companies sponsor. Those questions we've raised. We raised them a year ago. We raised them a year and a half ago. They still haven't been answered. So we are where we started with the E-rate program, which is this: you got to be careful of the gift rules. At the end of the day, you need to watch where the money comes from. You need to watch who you go out to lunch and dinner with. It's probably no different than your local procurement rules, just with the added twist that your E-rate dollars might get taken away if somebody decides to drop a dime. Lastly, the E-rate program has, under this current chairman of the FCC, has been the subject of some attempted raids. I just got done telling you there isn't enough money in the program. Well, the chairman of the FCC decided that that really didn't matter to him. He took $10 million out about a year ago for these logo grants, which I think some in California got. I know San Diego got some money. And this was essentially to provide internet access to low-income students as part of existing one-to-one programs. Those $10 million, that $10 million finally got out the door in October. There have been some evaluations, but they have not been completed. I think it is very unlikely, given the demand of the E-rate program, that those folks are going to receive follow-on funding. I don't think that's going to happen. Another thing that we actually managed to beat back was this idea that the FCC was going to get into the business of creating digital literacy corps or cadres, that they were going to fund digital literacy trainings all over the country, something they've never done before, have no core competency in, but they were going to do it. It was going to cost about $50 million a year out of the E-rate program to do this. We said that was a terrible idea for obvious reasons. And they backed down, and after several different stabs at trying to get the E-rate involved, including having the E-rate program administer the digital literacy core applications, which we said would just slow down, you know, what USAC already is supposed to do, they gave in. And now there is going to be no digital literacy core, or if there is, it's not coming out of E-rate's hide. So that was actually a victory, but unfortunately, it was a victory on defense, not on offense. So with all of that, I think this is where I appeal to all of you to help. There are definitely some real issues out there. There's the issue of, can we get our own ed tech program back again? If we get an ed tech program, can we get some money into it? The E-rate program clearly needs more money and needs some changes to it. We need help there. And there are ways for all of you to plug in. Andrea, who I don't know if is here, has already come to Washington a couple of times to attend advocacy days. We are having a legislative policy summit April 10th through 11th. I heartily encourage you folks to come. California, as I made clear at the top of this program, is a really important state. Your senators are critical. You have a number of House members who are really intimately involved with education policy. We could use the help of Californians in making the case that ed tech is something the federal government still needs to pay attention to and still needs to fund. So there's an opportunity to come to our policy summit. If you can't do that, Ed Tech Action Network, are folks here members of ETAN? I see a couple. Very easy thing to sign up for, www.edtechactionnetwork.org. And it is not an onerous thing. Every month or two, we will send you out an email alerting you to a piece of legislation or something that is going on with administrative rules, and we'll ask you to send a letter to your congressman or your senator or both. And the good news about that is we've actually prepared a letter for you. And you can send that, or more preferably, you can take pieces of that and make it your own. Receiving, when I was over on the Hill, when we received the same postcard 1,000 times, it didn't make a lot of difference. It's the personal stories that you folks all have that can talk about what you do, why this is important, why a particular program means something to you. That's going to travel a lot farther with these people than me just showing up there and saying, I work for a whole bunch of educators who are very concerned about this. Your stories are important. The most important thing is actually face-to-face contact, but if you can't do that, send a letter. And if you can't do that, see if you can invite these people to come to you. If you are having the opening of a computer center, if you are having a check received for any program, invite these people. Have them gather around cute kids and computers, and it will make everybody look great. Make sure pictures are taken. Here at the state, you can also do things. I know there are folks here who have been active at the state level. I'll just point out, unlike most legislatures, your legislature is coming back in December. And there is a lot of work that's going to be done there, not just on waivers. I understand that there's teacher evaluation systems that are being talked about at the state. But there are a lot of other things going at the state level that you can plug into. And even if I can't manage to find federal funding, maybe there's something that can be done here at the state level to repurpose existing funding or, God forbid, find some new funding in California. So please, the most important thing to do is to get involved. So with that, questions or cocktails? What do people want? Do people have any questions? Sir? Yep. Cell phone bills, there's a percentage of your cell phone bill, which is the part that they've devoted to long distance. I think it's about 30% of that can be assessed a fee for universal service. And this is important. When you see a federal universal service fee on your bill, and Joanne can back me on this, it is not all E-rate. E-rate is about a third of that. There are a couple of other major programs, the High Cost Fund, the Lifeline Link-Up Funds. Those are parts of universal service as well. E-rate is only a part of it. So if people say, E-rate's already costing me $2 for my phone bill, chances are that's wrong. Chances are we're only a third of that. Any other questions? Sir?
Has there been any kind of progress in the possibility of running that fee on internet companies or
there's a FCC has put out a rulemaking, which is essentially an effort for public comment about contributions, and things like that are being raised. But what's interesting here is that that's the toughest thing. It's whose ox are you going to gore here? Are you going to gore internet companies? Are you going to gore the cable industry? Are you going to gore wireless? Sorry, Joanne. Who's going to take it on the chin here? And they're all very powerful lobbies. So it's the last thing they really want to do. And it's certainly not anything they want to do before an election. And by the way, even when this election is over with on November 6th, or hopefully November 6th, they're probably not going to want to deal with it then. The chairman of the FCC, Julius Genachowski, has been fairly clear that he's leaving, whoever wins. So the next chairman, whoever that is probably going to have to pick up this ball and run with it. So I would say that, like just about everything in Washington right now, It's all on hold for the election and probably much further afterwards. I mean, I can, you know, I could blow up the kick the can down the road thing for you again, but that's essentially where we're at with everything. So if folks have questions and they want to email me or want to talk to me now, this is my email address, jbernstein@jbernsteinstrategy.com. I'd love to hear from you, particularly if you're interested in advocacy. Sir, I know you had a question. I do not, other than to say that, like everything else, it's going to be subject to sequestration, which means it's going to probably see an 8.2% cut. And if Romney wins, it could see even more cuts. There's just less money to go around in education.